We want to welcome you to the fourth in a series of videos discussing tornadoes and severe storms and how we respond to those or how we can prepare for those. And in this fourth video, we want to talk about what it looks like when we have been through the storm, we have survived the storm, and what is it going to look like in the future? Those are the things we want to focus on today. And one of the first things that I want to talk about is if you went through the storm and you suffered any kind of loss, and when I say loss, I don't just mean the death of someone that we cared about. You could have had something destroyed that meant a lot to you. You could have had your house suffer significant damage. And when you had that damage, you lost heirlooms that were in the home. Any kind of loss can create significant difficulty for you. And we have a typical emotional response to that. And when I say typical, I don't mean to make it sound like it's smaller than what it is. What I mean is that when we lose things or we lose people, regardless of the kind of loss that we have an emotional response that is to be expected. It is a grief response. And that can look any number of ways. Everyone grieves differently. Everyone suffers differently. Everyone recovers differently. So there is no one way that is going to look for everyone. So my first thing that I would say to you is please be patient with your family members who are struggling through those losses. Some of them may be angry. Some of them may be sad. Some may become depressed. And some other people will have almost like a mixture of very, very strong emotions, and they're unable to identify those because they have so many of them at the same time. So if you have suffered any kind of loss, the first things that I want to say is that you are going to experience an emotional change most of the holidays that come up over at least the next year. So if you've lost something that's important to you and an important day for your family or for you as an individual is say 4th of July or Labor Day or Thanksgiving or Christmas, you're going to have an emotional response during those holidays. And I want you to be prepared for those. It doesn't mean that you're not doing well. You could be doing very well in between. You're just going to have an emotional response on significant days. If someone you love died, you're also going to have that same response on days that were important to the two of you because of that relationship. And that could be birthdays, that could be anniversaries, it could be anything that is important to the two of you. Recognize when that happens. It just means that those feelings are being brought up again because of the situation. It doesn't mean that you're not doing well. It doesn't mean you're falling apart. It just means you are actually working through the emotions, okay? The second thing that I want to talk about is if you were significantly impacted by the tornadoes or the storms, you can be one of those people that every time it starts to get cloudy and it looks like rain is coming and storms are coming, you start to get very anxious. If you're one of those people, then I want to refer you back to a couple of the videos we've already done where it talks about how you can manage that. Right now, what I want to talk about though is that is a very usual response. If we have been through something that is traumatic to us, anytime we are in the similar situation, then we're going to have difficulty with that. And one of the things that I want to mention to that is we talked about triggers in previous videos. This can also be the same way. So it may get really cloudy and it may be a gentle rain and it doesn't bother you at all. However, you could have a storm come up that the wind picks up a lot and there's a lot of lightning and a lot of thunder and that additional noise and the lightning and all of that, which was part of the first storm that you went through. That may trigger the emotional response for you. So sometimes it depends on the kinds of storms that are coming. Again, if you're doing very well in between and you're only having these things happen, these emotions show up, in the middle of very strong storms, that's kind of to be expected for a while until you can get back to having a usual response. And that's going to take some time. Okay, and understand that if it gets a little bit less every time it happens and you're able to manage it a little bit better every time it happens, you're improving, and that's great. If, however, you think you need some help coping with that and talking through that so you can get through it easier, then there is help that you can seek and very briefly work through that and improve. The last thing that I want to talk about is the annual anniversary of storms. And this is one that's different than the other two I've just talked about. If you, say, went through the significant storms that we had, and I believe they hit here on December the 11th. So around the beginning of December, you may start to notice that you feel more anxious. For some reason, you feel a little, the big fancy word for it is discombobulated. But you just kind of feel out of sorts. It's like you're not your usual self. And the closer you get to December 11th, then the more anxious you feel, maybe a little bit on edge. Sometimes people tend to get a little more irritable just because they don't know the emotions that are going on with them. It can be very subtle, and it builds up kind of slowly. And other people may recognize it in you, and you may not see it because they just notice it because of the interaction they're having with you. Again, if you had significant trauma happen during the storms and the tornadoes, this is something that is very usual, that is to be expected, and it actually happens with a lot of things that we have. I talked earlier about grief and loss. We have the same kind of response with grief and loss when we've lost someone we care about. So you can have that same grief and loss response on the anniversary. You can have other emotions that happen on the anniversary. And again, it does not mean that you are not doing well. It just means that unconsciously you've kind of been reminding yourself, well, this is a time of year that happened. And you're going to be very anxious about that for a little while. And if it subsides, if it starts to go away, and you're able to manage it and talk about it with somebody you care about. And that's one of the things, let's shift. Let's talk about how you can manage that, because it is extremely typical for that to happen with most people who have been through any kind of a traumatic storm. Find ways to distract yourself. Find something else that you can do besides focusing on the fact that something negative happened a year ago. Find activities that you enjoy. Go find people that you enjoy being around with, and find ways to have positive time with them. The more you sit and think about what has happened before, the more it's going to have an impact on you. And it's already gone. It happened a year ago. And yes, we do live in Tennessee, and yes, storms are possible and they can come again. And that's why we have talked about how to be safe in storms and how to take care of you and your family and how to plan ahead so that you can have the best possible outcome. And those are on the other videos that we have talked about. Again, on this one, what we really want to focus on is that there can be an emotional impact on you for a year or two. Typically, it shows up on the anniversary of the storms. So if you're having difficulty with those, and the very simple things we've talked about are not able to help you, please look at the number here on the screen and call us and get the help that you need. Thank you.